Okay, please find your seat. It's good to have you all back again. I hope you had an interesting day so far, meeting good people, attending interesting sessions, and maybe even you listen to some good music during your lunch break. And as you know, if you want more of that music, it will all go down at the Vega tomorrow evening. And if you don't already have tickets, then you should get it, and that'll go down in the area where you can buy, you have lunch and coffee. So, take your seats and we'll get things rolling. The next few hours, we will have the plenary session. We will have the Transparency International Anti-Cooperation Award, and then we will have a few cocktails. But to moderate the plenary, I would like to introduce Barbara Trianfi. She's Executive Director of the International Press Institute. Barbara, please join me on the scene together with the panel. Yes, please join me. Welcome. Yes. And please, speakers, yes, you can follow Barbara. Yes, thank you. Please be seated. Oh, yeah. And you will have a formal introduction in a few minutes because, yes. As you know, there has been a few, or a lot, of high-level sessions, yes, please, going on this afternoon. And to make a brief summary of these, I would like to welcome on stage the Danish Minister for Development Cooperation. Please, warm welcome to Ulla Tørnes.
Excellencies, fellow ministers, ladies and gentlemen, what a productive day. What great discussions. What openness and what frankness. I feel very inspired, and I really hope that you do as well. Allow me to take this opportunity to pass on some of the key points from today. During the morning, the high-level segment convened for political discussions. Views were shared, experiences discussed, and achievement reflected upon, across countries and across sectors. It was a very, very interactive segment, identifying ways forward in the fight against corruption, both at national and international levels. The discussion centered on 4 main topics. First, increasing transparency. Second, curbing money laundering and illicit financial flows. Third, strengthening integrity in public procurement processes. And finally, fourth, promoting ethical leadership. The goal of the segment was not to reach consensus, but to have a fruitful exchange of insights and to inspire each other to now take an action. Many of the participants brought with them official statements outlining concrete initiatives that their countries and organizations will implement in the years to come. Partly new commitments, partly earlier commitments still to be implemented. The vision behind these statements was to focus on implementation, to put action behind the nice words. Examples from a few of the statements range from introducing e-procurement, introducing electronic payment of taxes, improving the protection of whistleblowers, adopting access to information laws, enhancing the transparency of political donations, strengthening the collaboration between national authorities and civil society in anti-corruption, improving international cooperation between law enforcement officials. An impressive list whose implementation will have significant impact. For Denmark, in our statement, we listed a wide range of anti-corruption initiatives. And let me use the opportunity to mention just 3 of them to you. One focuses on increasing transparency in public administration. Another on strengthening tax administration. We need this. And a third on developing a new national strategy for combating money laundering. We also mention our broad and increasing anti-corruption work in our development cooperation. This is my field. In this field, I'm personally committed to strengthening our work to identify digital tools in the fight against corruption and fraud. Some of you heard about this work in the panel debates just before this plenary. The statements are now being made publicly available as we speak. As also mentioned this in the morning, we will set up a monitoring mechanism to track progress in cooperation with Transparency International. We will engage civil society and watchdog institutions in this process. Before coming to Copenhagen, the participating countries, organizations, and companies did reach a consensus. And I'm proud to announce that a joint statement endorsed by the participants in the high-level segment has now been published on the IACC website. And I encourage all of you to read and appraise it. And let yourselves inspire by it. The statement touches upon a wide range of important anti-corruption issues that we have agreed to address individually or jointly. It recognizes the international nature of many of our challenges, but also points to national action that is urgently needed. It is true that one size doesn't fit all, but the statement reflects a clear political determination to curb corruption in all of our countries, organizations, and companies. And it provides ideas of how to leverage technology, innovation, and the present global political momentum to advance this agenda. I would like to pass on this statement as a baton for action to combat corruption to all of you. As I said this morning, anti-corruption is a prerequisite for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. In other words, it's a prerequisite for everything we do to develop a sustainable and just world. Let me conclude by thanking the participants in the high-level segment for your thoughts, for your leadership, your thinking and collective ambition to anti-corruption. Thank you all for coming to Copenhagen and engaging in what I hope will consolidate itself in an international coalition against corruption. To all of you who have come to the IACC, I wish you a very fruitful continuation. And then during the day, I saw this bag. And I will just end up by saying I fully agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tørnes, and thank you very much for joining us today. Now it's time for the plenary session, and Barbara, the scene is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, and welcome to the plenary session 1 on promoting good governance for peace and security. This session will look at how good governance, which is central to the fight against corruption, to the prevention of corruption, can be brought about. It aims to identify actions that governments and international organizations must implement in order to support citizens, activists, whistleblowers, and journalists who fight for their rights and the rights of their people and face threats and attacks because of this. Today's panel, today's impressive panel, we have 4 speakers, 4 women who bring with them an incredible wealth of experience in promoting good governance within very important institutions. And I will ask the speakers today to look at 3 points in particular. First of all, I would like you to consider what are the lessons learned? What are the lessons learned throughout the initiatives that your governments, your institutions, you yourself as an individuals have implemented to successfully fight corruption and in the process support those who carry the fight against corruption, those citizens who carry the fight. The second is, what is your vision? In an ideal world, free of constraints, what is your vision? Which initiative would you like to implement? Because maybe some of those we can implement them all together. And finally, and maybe the most challenging point, there is a gap between those who expose corruption, the activists, the journalists, the whistleblowers, and those who bring the corrupt to justice. Very often, those who expose corruption and go to great lengths, they put their lives and their works and their jobs, their profession at risk in order to expose corruption, to investigate and expose corruption. The most frustrating aspect is when they see no result. Rather the opposite. They're often confronted with attacks from the societies that they help move forward. So how can we close this gap? How can we ensure that once corruption is brought to light, the perpetrators are brought to justice? I would like to start from Ms. Gabriela Ramos, Chief of Staff and Sherpa to the G20 of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Ms. Ramos is responsible for the contributions of the organization to the global agenda, including a G20 and the G7. And she leads the Inclusive Growth Initiative and the new approaches to economic challenges, and also oversees the work on education, employment, and social affairs. Ms. Ramos, my question for you is, the OECD has been a global leader in the fight against corruption for many years. You spoke about 3 challenges that you see in this fight. One is ensuring political commitment, one is integrating non-governmental actors in this fight, and the third is offering protection to whistleblowers. How do you think, and how has the OECD looked at these challenges? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and good afternoon, everybody. Impressive setting. I have to just first thank the Danish government and the IACC for inviting the OECD, and to say that I learned from all of you, but I almost feel that like this is a therapy group because we really get together to see how much we can advance together. I think that for institutions like the OECD, that needs to bring a consensus among members with very different views, that needs to push the standards to make them more ambitious. Of course, we always can count on Denmark to help, but the fact is that sometimes it feels that we're always trailing behind. I just landed from Peru, where I was talking about anti-corruption with President Vizcaya. And one thing that we concluded is, how do we make sure that we move from cases to cases, scandals to scandals, to a culture of integrity? And I think that's a real challenge, because the fact is that it always seems that we are reacting to these issues, and then we need to build the whole infrastructure to really make sure that these issues really go away. And corruption is taking a toll in democratic governance, because 75% of our people don't trust institutions. If you ask them, It's because of economic outcomes, it's because of inequality, it's because of feeling that the life has not been fair to them, but it's also because of corruption. Because institutions that are there to advance their well-being are doing something else. And I think this is a very important point. The political leadership and commitment is very important on this issue. And of course, this question of sustainable development goals, how can we explain that money gets siphoned away for many other things when it needs to be invested in what we know we need to deliver for our people. Corruption also hits institutional capacities, and I think this is very important coming from a country like Mexico, but for many other developing countries. It really hits institutions not only in terms of the lack of trust, but also in terms of their capacities to deliver on the integrity agenda. And one thing that I really hope that we put a lot of attention, political processes and the financing of political campaigns. Because here we are trying to advance institutional responses to the outcomes here. And the fact is that sometimes the influence goes even beyond, before the whole process in the political outcomes are decided. And this is really worrisome. The question of civil society, the question of media, very important. I would say, Delia, get all the people, friends here, keep on pushing, keep on being vocal, because we need your strength in terms of saying, you see, they are asking and we need to deliver. And more when we know how horrible fate some journalists may face, which is really so sad. Now, how can we better promote good governance for peace and security, as we said? The OECD, as you know, is a standard setter, and we have an helicopter view because we deal with this integrity agenda from very different ways. We engage with governments, with business, civil society, media, and academia of more than 120 institutions. We work with all the institutions represented here, with the World Bank, Pascal, with many of these champions on anti-corruption. But what would we conclude? We really need a stronger, clearer, and more insistent commitments by global leaders to combat corruption. It cannot be lip service. It really needs to be a strong commitment. And I think that we can take advantage of the good experiences that we have, like the tax transparency work that we do, eliminating bank secrecy, going for beneficial ownership. I'm accompanied by Grace Perez Navarro, our champion there, doing the gold standards that they call the Anti-Bribery Convention, which has some monitoring mechanisms, publishing the reports of countries on a consensus -1, so it can never be prevented. Mathilde Benard is here also. And so I think that this is the most important commitments. We also need a better implementation. The OECD used to be comfortable to design the standards and be happy about it. Some countries feel that just by approving a law the work is done. Is not true. We need a better implementation, even in the most advanced economies, of global standards for transparency, integrity, and responsible business conduct, including those that are advanced by the OECD. Take, for example, the multinational guidelines of the OECD, which expresses government's expectations on business and responsible business conduct, but the reality is that 425 cases of alleged non-observance of the guidance had been brought to the table by NGOs and by the trade unions, not by the governments themselves, not by the business sector themselves. And I think this is a very important issue. And 56% of these cases were on human rights. You have been discussing the whistleblower. Not all the countries have protection of whistleblowers. Only 2% of the cases that we have registered on violation of the Anti-Bribery Convention has been because of whistleblowers. And sometimes the whistleblowers that dare to say something, they go to be prosecuted because of something else. And so this is also an agenda that we have been trying to advance, and it's really a patchwork. In the G20 3 years ago, we managed to advance, and Mary Crane is here from the G20. We had that 3 years ago. The reality is that implementation is lacking, and not even the building up of the institutional setting. And then I want to commend the G20 Argentinian presidency to put gender in the agenda of the anti-corruption cases, because the extortion that women can face is just beyond imagination. And I think it's very important that we also tackle the question related to gender, and we put a special attention. And we need more and better data on corruption and anti-corruption affairs. I know it's true, it's difficult to quantify, it's opaque, it's not easy to trace the money, but we need it because that will give us the strength and the elements to move forward. Progress in international cooperation, progress bringing together different institutions that deal with different issues, improving cooperation between tax authority and anti-corruption authorities, dealing with the digital revolution, going for blockchain that could help us as well as they help the criminals. I think that this is a vast agenda, but the reality is build up strong standards, deliver on them, build the credibility on delivering on them, because there's nothing worse than a wonderful agreement that has no delivery, because that hurts credibility, and I think this is a very important among all of our institutions.
Thank you very much for that. I'll get back to you with a follow-up question then on exactly how to do that. Let me move. Our second speaker is Beverly McLaughlin, a Canadian jurist and author who served as the 17th Chief of Justice of Canada from 2000 to 2017, the first woman to hold that position and the longest serving Chief Justice in Canadian history. Beverly, we spoke about this, if you want, gap in the justice system and the lack of the impunity that those who are corrupt enjoy. Two points in particular maybe would be great to hear from you. On one hand, from the point of view of the court, how can we close this gap? How can we have stronger justice system to ensure that those who have been whose corruption has been revealed or alleged are also brought to justice? And the second, on the point that Ms. Ramos raised on whistleblowers, how does a strong whistleblower protection system works? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank you very much, Barbara. It's wonderful to be here. It's not wonderful to hear so many sad comments about corruption. One would have thought that after all the talk that's been done in the last many decades, we would not have to gather in such numbers and have such sad conversations. But I do believe that we are learning and we're making a lot of progress. Barbara invited us to say something about vision, and I will. My vision is of what you called a culture of integrity. We have to go beyond the details of this corrupt deal and that swindle or whatever it is, and build cultures of integrity. How do we do that? I think it has to be everybody involved, including the state and all branches of the state, from police to tax to courts, etc., which are dedicated to building a culture of integrity. And we have to say zero tolerance. We may not get there the first year, but unless we say zero tolerance, we'll never get there. So what about the justice system? And the justice system, I'm going to focus on judges in a moment, but I just want to say, before I do, that the justice system starts with citizens who report things. A lot of times citizens don't go to the police or to the officials. So it starts with confidence on the part of the citizens that if they report, that will lead to relief. And then we have this whole system called the justice system. It starts with police who are trained and diligent. During my time, I found that we in Canada put much too little emphasis on commercial policing. There are trained people and they are excellent. They know how to trace money, they know how to use digital systems, but every state has to have that in place if they want to fight corruption. Beyond the police prosecutor, you have to have independent prosecutors. If the prosecutor will bow to the will of this politician or that person, then you will get nowhere. So you have to have independent prosecutors. And then you have to have you have to have a legal system that enforces integrity, because a lot of money gets siphoned through lawyers if you don't. It's a good way to launder money. You buy some property, the lawyer puts it through. So we've put in place in Canada very strict rules for law societies. All of these things have to be in place, and then finally you get to the court. And of course it goes without saying that the court has to have an absolute stellar approach to integrity. In Canada, we're fortunate that we do not have to deal with judicial corruption. But even in the court system, I know in many countries, corruption may not even be in the judge. It may be in the clerk who moves a file forward or does something like that. We have to develop within the courthouse a culture that says zero tolerance. And anyone who violates that cannot work there anymore. That's all that I can say my approach would be. Now, how do we convince the public that the judiciary, which has to be independent and therefore can't be hired or fired by this state official or that one, how do we convince the public that these judges who have their judicial independence, who are there for a long time, are going to be running the courts in a totally integral and honest way, giving justice to the citizens, not according to some message or some bribe or even some influence, but according to the legal merits of the case? How are we going to ensure they have the courage to stand up to injustice and corruption when they see it in the cases before them? The public has to trust the judiciary, and that trust is founded not only in the absence of actual corruption, but in a system, institutions that say to the public, we're transparent. If you have a problem, come forward. Which brings me to the judicial complaints procedure. In Canada, we believe that there has to be, at every level of court, a strong and functioning judicial complaints procedure. That is, the government sets up an office run by judges, because you have to do that for judicial independence, that is there to investigate any suggestion that the judges have, that a judge has done the wrong thing. It could be misconduct, but it could also, of all sorts of, could be insensitivity, but it also would include, of course, corruption. And I have briefly 6 rules that you have to set this up well. First of all, your system must be, as I say, run by the judges. But the first requirement is that it must be widely known and easy for citizens to access. So we have websites, and we've tried to improve our websites so that anyone can go online and find the Canadian Judicial Council's complaint procedure. And all you have to do is type in. If you don't want to have your name disclosed, you can ask that it not be disclosed. And they will take it up from there. Every complaint is looked at. Now, in the nature of the system, a lot of the complaints are not about judicial conduct or corruption or anything like that. The person didn't like the judgment. So you siphon 90% of them off and say, go to the Court of Appeal. And then you take the ones that you have left and you're very serious. So the first thing is accessibility. It has to be cheap, it has to be free, and it has to be easy. And it has to be in the right languages for the people. We have 2 official languages. The second thing is that the commission has to have the power to investigate complaints. You can't rely on people who may feel aggrieved to have the sophistication and the language and the legal ability to put their complaints forward. So if there looks like there's something there, the commission needs to be able to go out and investigate it itself. The third thing is that the vetting, the dealing with the complaints, has to be fast and efficient. It can't be delayed. If it's taking years, then their corruption or whatever else will take, and people will lose confidence in the system. The fourth thing is that the system has to be open. Of course, there are confidential aspects, but the complainant and the press must be informed of every step the commission takes on their case, and the hearing must be open to the press and the public. I will say in our system, we only have a few public hearings because most of the cases are dealt with on either by that initial triage or on paper, and they're resolved amicably. Everybody, the judicial council does what it makes its decision, explains it to the complainant, and that's the end of it, and the press. But this openness is key. It has to be transparent. And the fifth thing is that you have to have effective remedies. I don't think we have this perfect in Canada. We can give letters of advice, but under our statute as it is, the only other remedy is recommendation for dismissal, which must be done by the Parliament which may be done by the Parliament if the Judicial Committee. But you do have to have effective remedies. And sometimes that's hard. If you're just criticizing a judge openly before the press, you may undermine the confidence of the people in that judge, and the council may say, well, he or she was a good judge, but they had a slip, a misconduct or something. So it's a very delicate business, and you have to spend. Now, a lot of time, it's not easy to set up this system, and having set it up, we were continually faced with ways we could improve it. It takes a lot of work. Those are some thoughts, though, that you might take home with you if you are interested in setting up a judicial complaint system. And one final note, if that works for the judiciary, it might work for many other areas. Let the citizens complain and deal with their complaints in an open and efficient way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm glad you mentioned that last point, that is not perfect, even in Canada.
No.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker, Dr. Ngozi, is chair of the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, and is the former Minister of Finance in Nigeria. Dr. Ngozi has more than 30 years of development and financial expertise. She has served twice as Nigeria's finance minister, and she has also held several key positions at the World Bank, including as managing director. Dr. Ngozi, I have two aspects that I think would be really interesting to understand from you. As you have been part of the government of Nigeria, a government that has declared a fight on corruption. And you have implemented, or you have fought for different remedies to be taken against corruption. However, you yourself have become a victim in the fight. Just before the panel, I was reading from Dr. Ngozi's book. If you don't have it, get a signed copy. Is terrifying. It's terrifying. The stories you tell here are absolutely terrifying, and unfortunately we know are the stories of many of those who fight corruption. My question for you is, how can state institutions be stronger in defending people who, like you, stand up against corruption? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and I want to thank the government of Denmark and TI for inviting me to share some lessons from my experience with you. And I have to say something. The founder of TI, Peter Eigen, is sitting right there in front of us, and he was my first boss at the World Bank when I joined as a young person. So I just wanted to say a quick hello to him. It's difficult to know where to begin, but Barbara, thank you for advertising the book. So I don't have to say anymore. Make sure you buy it. I'll even sign it for you. This morning, as I listened at the very good plenary, I heard a lot of the minister, the prime minister, everybody said two things. One is we are tired of talk. It's all about talk. Let's implement, let's take action. And the other is that corruption is everywhere. No country is immune. It's only a question of degree. Well, I thought, as they were speaking, there are some people who have taken action. And so I'm one of them. Not alone, but with a team. Because you don't act alone. There were people who worked with me, there were people who supported me, but it was a very difficult experience. So I thought I would talk about it and talk about lessons learned. Second is to say I come from Nigeria, which often people talk about with a reputation for a lot of corruption. But I wanted to say one thing. In my book, most of the things I'll say will come out of here. I make the point that the majority of Nigerians are honest, hard-working people who just want the government to provide basic services and then get out of the way and let them get on with their lives because they are very entrepreneurial. And I maintain that. But we are in the vice for decades now in the country, I would say, of a small percentage of the population, political, administrative, and otherwise, that I would call a kleptocratic elite that has a stranglehold on the country and gives the country this very bad name. And realizing that made me also realize one thing, that for the majority of the people, one has to commit to go and fight. It's no good sitting somewhere and making long speeches and saying all these broad things. I said to myself one day, it begins with you, for your country. I mean, Kristalina is not going to come inside Nigeria to fight corruption for us. The judge is not going to do it. We Nigerians have to commit. And it's not just the government. Each individual has to make a commitment to try to fight. So that was the first principle that I felt that one should commit to. And then the other thing that stirred me on this corruption fight, it's not just about money. I'm an economist by training. So you get passionate about the issue of money diverted that could have been used for education, for health. We all talk about it. But let me tell you that the worst thing about corruption is the way it corrodes the values of a society. The way it insidiously undermines integrity, trust, and the very fabric of society. And that's what I found. In my country now, it's very difficult to get a young person that believes they can actually achieve something on merit. If a person wants a job, they look for someone who is going to introduce them to someone. And that's because of that. And we cannot allow a small minority to undermine the majority in a country. So that's the issue. And we cannot allow the young people to lose hope. Because we've got a very vibrant, interesting country, we've got a vibrant, interesting continent, and we have to fight for it. So those are some of the thoughts. So when you ask me, what is it? The type of corruption that we fought, can be even classified in the classic framework that was put forward by William Dorinsky and Shilpa Pradhan in their 2007 paper, Exploring Corruption in Public Financial Management. We fought against grand corruption, which is a large-scale transfer of public resources for private interest. Political corruption, defined as influence peddling on resource allocation and projects that benefit the decision makers, their friends and acquaintances. And we fought against administrative corruption, which is the misappropriation and misuse of public funds, fraud, waste, and abuse. So the gamut of corruption. And the one observation I had in all of this is that underlying all this was something very obvious, an absence of institutions, systems, and processes, of very weak institutions. So when we talk about fighting corruption, I really want to make this point. We focus on the punitive and getting the people who perpetrated the corruption and not allowing impunity. And that's very important. That matters. We must do it. But it's not all. Because if you don't fix the underlying systems that allow the corruption in the first place, you just get a new set of people and a new set of corruption. The difference between developing and developed countries, it's not that the developed countries have any more integrity or more moral. It's just that over time, they have built stronger institutions. And we see that even that can be undermined. As the Prime Minister said this morning, with an absence of strong regulation, you can get money laundering and diversion of funds. So institutions matter in both developed and developing countries for fighting corruption. And the minute a society turns its attention away from safeguarding its institutions and its values, it is shooting itself in the foot. So what I found was that in my country, we had weak, very weak institutions to non-existent institutions. And when I say that, I mean in public financial management. There were few systems and processes that underpin the management of resources. So that, of course, allowed easier access to these resources. I'll just give an example. Finding that if I wanted to pay salaries as finance minister when I first came, I had to transfer money to a ministry who then paid. You know, so it was more like cash transfers. How can you do that in a country of that size? So we had to go to the president and say, I was quite shocked when I first started, my first time as finance minister in 2003. This is what we found. And then I said, this cannot work. We need to put in place strong systems and processes. And with the help of the World Bank, we were able to build in an integrated public financial management system so that electronically the Treasury could talk with the budget office and with individual ministries and agencies. We added an integrated personnel and payroll system so that people with biometrics could get money paid directly to their accounts and not through this system of transfers. We added a third angle called the Treasury Single Account so that the Ministry of Finance could have an overview of all government resources. These were not there. So if you don't have the underlying systems in place, that just aids. I'm not saying it solves every problem. It has not solved every problem. But at least it minimizes or helps to underpin less corruption. So institutions matter. The same with the judiciary. It's not just about public financial management. The judge talked about what you need to do. We need a strong, independent judiciary. We need an ombudsman, which we don't have in many of our countries, that people can report to when corruption is happening, things are not going right, and civil rights are being violated. We need a strong civil society. I think civil society is part of the institutional base. But civil society has to also be doing the right thing. And we should be mindful that civil society is not being diverted, because a society mirrors what happens in a society pervades everywhere. But I believe in civil society, and we need a strong one. These are some of the underpinnings. So when I talk institutions, I mean broadly across society. We need independence, we need checkmates, we need a strong audit function if we are going to fight corruption. Now, this is not sexy. You know, I can use that word because now the Minister of Development Cooperation put up this bag. You know, it's not sexy at all. When you talk about integrated financial management system, eyes glaze over. Eyes light up when you say, yes, we've got that person and they are going to jail and we are going to do this. But to build institutions, you need staying power. That means that people have to commit. Donors, the government, they have to commit to build this over 10 years. We were building some of these systems I mentioned over 10 years, and it's taking that long to finish them. Is the international community prepared to commit for that long? Or do we have a project mentality of 5 years and we're out when you're doing development cooperation? This is a question. So some of the lessons, I'll just go quickly to just give one quick story. So my vision, you said, what is our vision? My vision is of strong institutions, independent, strong oversight, buttressed by transparency of information. One of the things we did as action against corruption was simply publishing the revenues of government in the newspaper, loading them on the website, something that people never had in my country before. We started it in 2004 with the backing of the presidents. Both times I served, both presidents supported it. And it was revolutionary. Just people knowing that they got revenues of X per month in their local government changed everything, because before they were told they weren't getting anything. So information is king and gives power to people to fight. The other things, lessons learned, and I'll tell you one story and then give you 2 or 3 lessons learned. My anecdote, just in this book, one of the things that we talk about is a book of stories that illustrates bigger points of what happened when last time I was in government. So, the book starts with a story of my mother being kidnapped. And when I tell that story, which was one of the most painful episodes in my adult life, my 83-year-old mother kidnapped for 5 days. And the reason she was kidnapped, she's still alive. She's a retired professor. So I tell this because she's alive to tell her own story, if anybody wants to challenge her. She was taken from the front of her house, and the reason was this. When I came as finance minister, we have in my country a regime of oil subsidies. We sell crude oil, we import refined oil, and we subsidize it. So we pay importers the subsidy. And when I left government first in 2006, we had a subsidy of $2 billion. When I came back in 2011, I was being shown, one of the first things I was shown by the Director General of the Budget is that they had already paid $11.6 billion in subsidy payments. And he was very alarmed. And he said, something is wrong here. And I was alarmed. I said, how can we have jumped 6 times more than what the last figure I knew in 5 years? So to cut a long story short, we asked the president if we could audit these accounts. We audited $8.5 billion worth of subsidies, and we found $2.5 billion worth of fraud. And with the support of the president, then we refused to pay. We refused to pay. There were things like ghost ships. People were claiming they supplied oil. When we checked with Lloyd's Register, we found that the ship that was supposed to bring the oil was actually in the South China Seas when it was said to be supplying oil in Nigeria. So we refused to pay the $2.5 billion, and that was why when my mother was kidnapped, she asked the kidnappers, what is it? What did her daughter do? Because they found her and said, are you the mother of the finance minister? To which she happily replied, yes. Thinking that they were going to be complimentary, and they slapped her and pushed her into a car and sped away and kept her in the forest for 5 days. And they told her, it's because your daughter refused to pay the subsidy money. It was a terrifying experience. But that is just one story of what can happen to you. The second thing that can happen to you is that those who are corrupt, they don't just sit and fold their hands when you fight them. They try to destroy your reputation. And now we have the internet. So one of the things that happened to me is people going on she diverted $1 billion. She did, my husband said to me, so why are we still paying mortgage? Why aren't we in a yacht somewhere? We can laugh about it, but some people actually believe that. That's the unfortunate thing. I mean, I'm fortunate because I had an international community that knew who I was and stood by me. But a lot of people believed it. So they can damage your reputation and try to ruin your life. So when we talk about whistleblowers and people who fight corruption, it's not an academic topic for me. And for many others who worked with me, they were also penalized. And so the lessons learned, one of the things we learn is that what can the international community do? First, you cannot fight the corruption. I maintain that. It has to be fought by those who own the problem. But the international community can support, one, with analysis. And this is where institutions like the World Bank come in. If you're fighting, you need data. You need incontrovertible data. So bilaterals, multilaterals can support with analysis. Second, you can support with helping to build institutions that are missing, that I talked about, by bringing the money and the processes. Third, you can give moral support. Discern. People get deceived. When you come to a country, those who are the corrupt are the ones who will hijack you to tell you how good they are and misinform you about those who are truly fighting corruption. So be careful. Try to study on the ground who is doing what and support those who are doing the right thing. Fourth and last, safe haven. Many of those fighting corruption, we sit here in this big conference with 1,500 people, but there are people among us who are fighting, who have no support. They don't have anywhere to go when things get bad. I'm trying to advocate for an endowment fund that will be managed somewhere so that if someone is fighting corruption, is a whistleblower, and needs to run out, there'll be resources to bring them out quickly with their family, and they can go somewhere, be a fellow, get away for a while. That doesn't exist. When it happened to one of my colleagues in the past, Nuhu Ribad, it was the grace of the World Bank. We had to run World Bank, government of Norway, we were scrambling. So let me just stop there and say, if you want to help, let's think about creating such an endowment fund. It's a concrete outcome. It will save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ngozi, for some very, very interesting remarks, and which also helped me introduce the next speaker, Ms. Kristalina Georgieva, who is the CEO for the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the International Development Association, which is the World Bank's lending arms for middle-income and poor countries. Ms. Georgieva, our previous speaker spoke about what the international community can do. To that, I add also, I'm a strong promoter of engaging civil society, in particular journalists, of course, in development programs in order to make sure that they can follow the money. Tell us a little bit what the World Bank has succeeded in doing in this direction. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I have been twice very fortunate in my professional life. Once when I inherited Ngozi's job as Vice President Corporate Secretary, and second time when I inherited her job as Managing Director in a new title. So we go a long way. I actually will continue very much in line of what Ngozi was talking about, but before that, you asked us about vision. And very lovingly to all the men in the audience, my vision is a world where women are in charge of collecting taxes and investing in basic services, education, health, safe water, the environment. Very lovingly, let me do this, very lovingly to the men and the women. And I want to go to a story. When the minister was showing the bag, I was thinking of moments in my life when I actually felt in my hearts of heart that I wanted to F corruption, meaning fight it. And one of these moments was in 2011 going to Haiti after the earthquake. It was horrible, devastating scene. And then I was asking Haitian people, what can we do to help? Every single one of those I talked to, a driver, a person in our office, a family in a camp, would say, do not give any money to the government. The degree of mistrust in the government was overwhelming. And it actually told me that as horrible the earthquake was, it was not Haiti's biggest problem. Haiti's biggest problem was Papa Doc, Baby Doc, all these years of bad governance. And Haiti is not alone. There are 35 countries where governments collect less than 15% of GDP in taxes, meaning they cannot pay for services. So they pocket money, they don't pay for services. Corruption kills. And of course, it is the poor people that are most dramatically impacted. I actually got some statistics that in Sierra Leone, paying bribes to get the basics takes at least 13% of the income of a poor family, and it takes 3.8% of the income of a rich family. So that is the context in which we, the World Bank, find ourselves, especially in fragile states, addressing corruption. We are a learning organization. We did not start from the right foot a couple of decades ago. In the 80s, I wouldn't say we were in the right place. But over the years, we have learned, and what we have learned very much resonates with what Ngozi was talking about. One, we have a huge responsibility to shed light over corruption, to do the analytics, to be able to identify the root causes of corruption, and then have very clear, actionable recommendations to governments how to deal with those, and then find the people and build the institutions. And that takes a long, 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 long time. I was talking in a previous session, I'm a Bulgarian, my country is an EU member. We still have problems. We still have judiciary that is not entirely trusted. Just imagine if it is a fragile, poor country that has to build these institutions, what it takes. And then we have to brave and step with programs that front and center address corruption. Ngozi was very modest. She was among those that built the stolen assets recovery program that the bank and UN, so far, I believe we have brought back over $1 billion of stolen money. We have to actually do things that are hard. And the most important lesson I learned, and I think I can talk about my institution, we learned, is exactly what Ngozi said. We are not going to be those to win it. In my country, we have a very, very good saying that you can take a horse to water, cannot make the horse drink. It is political will in the country, it is the brave men and women in the country that are going to address it. But we do have a responsibility if we are dragging this horse through a desert, and when we get there, there has to be water. And if it takes decades, we do decades of work, but the water has to be there. So when the horse decides to finally drink, there is something to drink from. I like very much the recommendation that Ngozi gave us on thinking about people who risk their lives to fight corruption and what we can do about them. And perhaps we can take that offline and discuss it. But just to finish, I said we are a learning organization. Today, our eyes are set on three things. One, how to continue to use our own system of fighting corruption in our own projects. Our vice president for fighting corruption is right here. Pascal, get up, people need to see you. One more strong woman, here she is. How we can make this system, and actually we have spread our wings, we now have debarment with the other development banks. We debar a crook company, the other banks would debar it with us and vice versa. How to continue to advance the tools and the instruments we have for the world to share. We are working with a high-tech company on possibly using artificial intelligence to track down corruption, signals of corruption through big data. Two, technology can be poor people friend or enemy. How we can make technology work especially for the poor, to identify the ghost workers, cut the line, so money is saved. And we actually did in Guinea saving of 20 million a year as a result of that. And 3, how to bring new ideas forward. For example, beneficial ownership. Bring down the curtain that hides who owns what. And I think when I look at us here, I'm kind of both depressed and very encouraged. Depressed because there is so much evil. Men created, and women sometimes, more rarely, but women sometimes created. But also there is so much commitment and strength. So thank you for bringing it here for this mutually reinforcing community. Thank you.
I think there is a very positive message emerging from this panel so far, which is let's not forget that the corrupt are a minority. Those who live out of the system, they're strong, and the system is difficult to break, but they remain a minority. So let's try to build on that. I have a lot of questions, but only less than 20 minutes to go, and I would like to see if there is any question from the floor. Oh, many, of course. Is there a microphone in the room? Coming up. I think there is a gentleman there, 2 there, and 2 here. I'll take a few questions and then go back to the panel to give some answers. Thank you so
much. Thank you very much, and very encouraging to hear the views of 4 very strong women. My name is Shakil Shabir. I'm a member of Parliament and the chairman of the African Parliamentarians Against Corruption. My intervention basically is the fact that basically it's the issue of national values and ethics. Corruption cannot fight unless ethics and national values are redeveloped and reinstituted and reinculcated. So most of the time, it's a child up to 8 years old where the ethics and culture and honesty is really and started to be inculcated between 3 to maybe 12. Now that means that many of us, 90% of us, have now been in education. We learn up to that time to be ethical, and thereafter we are taught how to make profits. So we become unethical by way of education. It's sort of it works backwards. So my question really is based on the issue of how do we do this and inculcate the national values. In my country, we have a very good chapter on national values, chapter 6, but in fact, we are not able to re-inculcate this. And that's the critical question we have, and we wonder whether there is a way that we can start the process. And as you said, there was a very famous Nobel Peace Prize winner in my country called Wangari Maathai, and she gave us the hummingbird analogy, where there was a forest fire and the big animals had given up. They said they cannot stop the fire, but the hummingbird was going and bringing a drop of water every time. And they asked us, why are you doing this? They said, well, I'm doing the best that I can. So I think that the idea really is this, that we need to do the best that we can, and the international community needs to support us in the best that we can. So like the minister from Nigeria, and I will look for that book. As you have said, we in Kenya have now the Whistleblowers Act, and I'm sure the other countries do, but the issue really is how do we put it into action, and how do we get the political will to inculcate the national values? Thank you.
Thank you for that. The next question right next to you, I'll ask to keep the questions short. Thank you.
I want to thank the Danish government for this opportunity, and I want to raise this question. You know, corruption is very easy to describe, but in tackling corruption, what we must understand is the issue of power. And it is easy to point finger to poor countries, but the role of the rich country must also be put in context. Where is the money going? It's a question we must ask ourselves. Unfortunately, the poor country hasn't got the power. And the narratives is shaped by the rich country. For example, my colleagues that are supposed to come from Niger, from Sierra Leone, they were not granted visa to come to Denmark. And if you look at the hall today, 60–70% of the participants in this conference comes from the rich country. And so you can see the discussion, you can see the narratives. This is the real challenge in talking about corruption. I come from Nigeria, where almost 60–70% of the resources we're talking about that have left the country are in London, in America, in Switzerland. What are we talking about? I recall when the minister, both of us went to Switzerland, when she was a minister in Nigeria, and she talked about the need for civil society to work closely with those in government. And we raised the question in Switzerland. And from that time to this point in time, the Swiss government has returned over $1 billion back to Nigeria. Where is the US government? Where is the UK government? It's still the challenge. And we have the tax havens everywhere. So the very kleptocrat that the minister refers to, they have passports. They are the only one that get visas. The very poor people in Nigeria don't get visas. Who grants them visa? Who grants them access to the tax haven?
Thank you for that.
Who help them? So I would like to point this question to the World Bank again, that in their analysis, they should give opportunity, voice to the very poor, so that their own story can be reflected in all this debate. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there are 3 questions on this side and 1 more there, and then I'll... Oh, sorry. I think here there were... I'm not sure I will take all the questions. I'm so sorry. Yeah. 1, 2...
Thank you. I'll try and be very brief.
3,
I'll try and
4 and 5. That's it.
I'll try and be very brief. My name is Frank Vogel. Ngozi, every time you speak, I take down all your words of wisdom. And so in 2007, you gave a speech, and you told the story of a student called Rose, who went to a university from a very poor family. And when she was there doing very well, according to your speech, she was asked for money by her professor to get a passing grade. And she said she didn't have money. So he asked her for sexual favors. And because she refused, she lost her degree and her family was impoverished. So my question is very specific. You may want to know that we just yesterday at the Transparency International annual meeting passed a resolution to increase our efforts at TI on gender and corruption. But my question to you is very simple. How do we launch a serious Me Too movement against sexual corruption in the poorer countries of the world, where the women who are so abused by that corruption do not even have the opportunity to report it? Often they can't even report it within their own families. And the aid agents keep telling us, if you don't have data, we can't give you support. What's the solution here? And Ngozi, I will continue to remember your speeches. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There is a question next to you.
My name is Dr. Nasser.
Very short, sorry, we have very little time. Thank you very much.
Okay, my name is Nasser Sana from Kuwait. I am former member of parliament and former chairman of GOPAC, Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption. Listening to these nice speeches, we come to some kind of confusion. Now, returning a stolen asset of $1 billion, is that a figure that a World Bank person in charge could use it in such community? That's very little. We know a lot of stolen assets, so who is responsible? What's the World Bank is doing? So my question is, to all panels, if you could answer, what is the international community is doing to fight corruption? What is it, the gap? Is it widening? Are we doing well? Or the corrupt actors are doing better? And to what extent? Thank you.
Thank you. Behind you, if you may, with the white T-shirt.
Hello, my name is Hinda. I'm from Tunisia, and I represent iWatch organization. So, first of all, thank you so much for these speeches and all this energy. I'm so fascinated. And my question is, so we talked about institutions, governments, women, whistleblowers. What about the youth, the young people? What do you think the best mechanisms to involve young people in building institutions and changing the system? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. 1 and 2, and then, sorry, here, this gentleman, and then the gentleman in the back, and then I'll ask the panelists to get back, because we have 10 minutes left.
Hi, my name is Zemin Husseinov, and I have a question to Madame Georgieva. I'm from Azerbaijan. I'm an investigative journalist. I'm also head of the Media Watchdog organization. My question is, sometimes high-level figures give the credits to authoritarian leaders, like Mehriban Alieva, wife of our president, which is recently nominated also to vice president position. As you say on your speech, the problem is not like catastrophe or disasters or earthquake. This problem is Papa Dog, Baby Dog. We have our own Papa Dog and Baby Dog, which is one of them you know very well, is Mehriban Alieva. You are participating in a few events, for example, in Nizami Gencevi Center. They are invited you in Washington. But you have photos with them sometimes. How you can use your leadership? Because, again, we have stories by OCCRP when the former UNESCO director, she's received something from our ruling family, from First Lady, from Mehriban Alieva. And we still don't have any public investigation in Bulgaria. And how, as like you Bulgarian politician, how you commented these topics, and how you can use your influence or possibilities to meet with these people in the events in Washington or in Brussels to blame them for, guys, you must stop corruption in your own countries. You must stop steal the money, you must stop jail the investigative journalists. Thanks.
Thank you for that. One last question in the back. Very short, if possible.
Good afternoon.
Oh, sorry, that's okay.
My name is Mark Worth. I'm with the European Center for Whistleblower Rights in Berlin. And today, there's a chance for everybody in this room not to just talk about something, but to do something. There's a directive, a piece of legislation being considered right now in the European Parliament to protect whistleblowers in the EU. So please, everybody who is from an EU country, everybody who's from an EU candidate country, when you walk out the door, go to the webpage of the European Parliament, look up your European Parliament member, send them an email saying one sentence, please vote for the European Directive on Whistleblower Protection. This is long overdue. We finally have the attention of the EU officials. Please help us pass this very important law. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
This is some good news. This is good news. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes left, and I ask our panelists to give very brief, 2 minutes each, answers about some very easy questions from our audience. How to implement, what are the incentives to convince the political leaders, and how can you use your leadership to talk to those who promote corruption in bilateral meetings? Thank you very much.
Let me just go back to the question of 2 billion by the STAR initiative. I think that's just one initiative by the World Bank. I think that if we were to measure how much they have been, wherever it is, I think that it really saves a lot of money. But let me give you another figure that comes from our tax work, our transparency work from the OECD. 92 billion of tax revenues to our tax administrations from tax evaders that knew that the door was being closed. So they came back to the tax authorities to say, oh, in the hypothetical case that I have to pay because I have a friend that didn't, and sometimes he did 92 billion. How much do we want to really measure these things? It's just huge amount of money. I think this is a very important. Education is quite important, but as Beverly said, if there is no strong judicial system, if the sanction does not materialize, if there is no incentives, no education, no culture is going to change, because there is no more stronger deterrent than sanctions being applied, and I think this is a very important. The question of benchmarks, for us, for the OECD, race to the top. We don't have money, we don't provide financing. What we provide is just the naming and shaming, and I think this is a very important role that we need to play in terms of comparing countries on their systems, to follow the money, to go for beneficial ownership. That is the ultimate frontier that we need to bring forward, and of course the gender agenda is very important. Let me just finish with a comment. We have been saying, to be effective, you need to bring the institutions together, because an holistic approach. You need to bring those that are fighting money laundering and those that are fighting corruption and those that are fighting together, because at the end they are fighting the bad guys, and we need just to make them communicate better. We need to bring those that are the international institutions at the international level, international cooperation, also to close these gaps. All the things are linked. And one of my greatest concern, and a great concern of the OECD that we have documenting, is increased inequalities of income, of opportunities, of wealth, that is opening the door for undue influence. When you have economies in the OECD where financial assets, 80% of financial assets are owned by the 5% top of the income distribution, how can you avoid undue influence? So these things are linked. I think we need to rethink how do we deal with these issues. And as I mentioned in one of my panels, all of our strategies are going to pale away if we don't put a good look in political financing, and who pay for the political races, and how do we ensure that the politicians are not captured even before they take power. So this is my final comment.
Thank you very much for that. I move on to Beverly. What was the incentive for Canada to put in place such a strong complaint system?
Yeah, well, we have to have this expectation by the public that if there's any corruption, it'll be exposed. We don't always succeed, but that must be the expectation, and we have to tailor all our education and our institutions to that end and judge them by that standard. So the gentleman asked a question about the little children who are taught the right values, of course, and why do they lose them? Why does it not persist? They learn the wrong values from the culture in their country, from maybe losing their dreams of ever being able to get a fair deal, and settling for what will work for them in their life. So we have to maintain this, everything we can do for a culture, to protect a culture of integrity. I think we have to protect those who do speak out, and even and we have to use legislation. In Canada and the United States, we have passed anti-corruption legislation, and I can tell you that it has made an impact on business and how business is done by Canadian companies operating in the third world and the United American countries operating in the third world. Somebody raised this problem of, the rich country. But so a lot of Western countries are passing this kind of legislation, and it is changing the way our companies do business outside the world. The final thing I want to mention is going back to speaking out. There are many ways people silence critics. One of the most recent ones in my country, Canada, has been what's called a slap suit. You all know what a slap suit is, I suppose. But if you don't, it is a lawsuit that is intended to censor, intimidate, and silence critics, usually critics of a particular environmental project, but it could be a journalist exposing corruption. So the journalist stands up and says something, maybe can't give the source because of confidentiality. Boom, along comes a lawsuit and says, we're suing you for defamation and a number of other things. And the journalist has no money, and so this has a dampening and intimidating effect on everything. So we have a group of judges, ex-judges from my court and others, went to government and said we need to have anti-slap laws, so that now they're just passing such a law in Ontario. The person, the journalist, or whoever is trying to be the protester, the activist who is trying to, who the company or whatever wants to silence, will be able to get that suit dismissed if there's no merit in it very quickly with no cost. There are imaginative legislative solutions that can be brought, and I'd just like to bring that to the table.
Thank you very much. Gotz, maybe my question for you is, what role for the youth? How can we ensure the young people grow up with a different culture than the one we have been living?
Okay, I'll do that and try to touch on one or two of the other things. The youth. Well, first it begins with what the Kenyan legislator said on the education of young people. You know, if we've lost the people now, we have to start. I know that in most countries with strong education systems, they start inculcating in their young people from kindergarten the values they want them to have. So we need to stand back in our African countries and say, what is in our education curriculum? Starting from kindergarten, are we putting these values in? And to youth, I think this all is about the youth. I'm sorry if you didn't get that. One of the passions for me going into this is seeing youth who no longer believe in meritocracy in the country, who have no trust. So I think youth themselves have to take up the gauntlet. You can do it through civil society, through student groups, but it starts with you. You have to stand up first and say, here are the things I stand for, and I'm going to gather others of like mind. We are going to, when we see something being done wrong, we will not be afraid. We will stand up, we will form groups, we will protest, we will not let it go. So I think the youth, it's your future. You can play a very active role through civil movements and student movements and through your own personal actions. And on the issue of poor countries always being mentioned, and what about rich countries? I agree completely with what Reverend Ogola is saying. I think it's both. I think developed countries need to do more. It has been far too difficult to get resources that are packed in developed countries. It took us 14 years to get the $500 million we did from Switzerland. But we eventually got it, and the Swiss have been very good in trying to release the resources they have. But I think everybody needs to step up. It shouldn't take that long. Don't hide behind laws. And I also think a power thing, I would suggest we also ally not just with governments, but with civil society in developed countries. You've got the open government partnership that was talked about. We can make strong alliances with them. It's a very good group. We've got, I belong to a group called the B Team. I think the leader, Robin, is here. It's a group of top organizations in the private sector who have decided they are not only about profit, they are not about making money, they're about doing the right thing, both for transparency, because it's good for the bottom line, even for the environment. So let's also ally with those people and work with them. Thank you.
Fortunately, I think I have to stop you. Thank you. The last question, Kristalina, maybe just how one point has not been answered. How can we give a stronger voice to those who fight corruption in poor countries?
I was going to go straight to that. it is absolutely critical for organizations like mine to amplify the voice of poor people in the high corridors of power. And I have some of my colleagues here who work exactly on that every day. So the worries, the concerns, the hopes, the aspirations, that they get lifted. And you're absolutely right to demand that from us. We have gone a long way of recognizing that it is a responsibility to people who do not have that access on their own, that we speak up for them. And can I say one more thing?
Of course.
I got a bit lost in the Azeri story. We Bulgarians have been accused of trying to kill the Pope and many other things. So it's kind of not new, we're this Balkan nation. So maybe we can follow up, but I've never met your president, and I really genuinely have no idea what your worry is. So maybe off the record we can talk about it. But my plea is for all of us to kind of take our responsibilities and work within our countries to make sure that they go in the right direction. And if $1 billion is too little on the scale of all that is stolen, and that is true, for those who got money in the northeast of Nigeria, very poor, this $1 billion is a lot of money. So help us to get more.
Thank you. By popular demand, I need to give 1 more minute to Ngozi.
Half a minute, I feel bad. Frank posed a specific question about helping the Me Too movement. Frank, we'll talk offline, but the first thing I think we have to do is document. We have to document the stories in order to give them credits, because those people have very little power, and nobody will believe them when they say anything. But if you externally document it, that begins to help.
Thank you. Before I ask you to join me in thanking the panel, I want to remind you, after this panel is over, please remain seated, because we go straight into the awards ceremony. And now join me with a clap of hands to thank the panelists. Thank you.